Youniverse brings to you a new series, 3 Things You Need to Know Today. And it's all about how real beings do well-being. Hi everybody and welcome to 3 Things You Need to Know Today. Thank you for tuning in into the first episode. You're now into episode 2. Before we move ahead, I'd like to introduce you to somebody very, very cool. Imagine an international well-being globetrotter. Imagine. He set his impact on countries like Australia, America, UAE, India, and many more. Well, if that's not enough, he also is a self-made entrepreneur and he is running his own well-being and happiness page all over social media. So you can catch him. And adding to that, his name is Sanjeevan Sandhu. You can see him on all social media platforms across. But most importantly, you should know one thing about him. He says happiness and well-being in the real way. Over to you, Sanj.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tanya. Thank you very much, Team Youniverse, for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to a very good conversation. So, and thank you for the kind introduction. Let's get this show on the road.
His passion for happiness and well-being has led him to work with corporate giants and, of course, clients all over the globe. So, Sanj, if that's not enough, we're very, very excited to hear from you with our top 3 questions today from 3 Things You Need to Know. Can we shoot?
Shoot, please.
Sanj, you've been working with a lot of people for a very long time in the well-being sector and very diverse group of people. What do you think is the biggest secret of the well-being industry?
Question, Tanya. When you mentioned this question to me, I want to give you a very honest answer because that's what you and your audience deserve. So I'm gonna put this answer in two parts. Okay, so your question is, what's the biggest secret of the well-being industry? So it's been almost 4 years now since jumping into the well-being world, and the first secret that I would say that builds on to the second secret. So it's one big secret. But the first part is that when jumping into the wellbeing world, I was very naive, very naive from an experience point of view. So I assumed, or I was naive to think, that every single person that I would meet within the wellbeing world would have their life absolutely sorted. They would be so confident with themselves that everything in life would be good, would be great, would be colorful, would be shiny, and would be fun. And after a few days or even just a few weeks of working with different people within the wellbeing world, I realized that a lot of these people who work within the wellbeing world have the same challenges that every single other person on the planet has as well. Whether it's about family, whether it's about income security, whether it's about self-esteem. But then what brings me on to the second part is that their way of dealing with them was completely different. So my biggest secret from being on the other side of the wellbeing industry the last 4 years is that any person who you meet who is a genuine well-being to you, so any person who you meet feel like they represent well-being, will have a complete and utter focus on one thing, and they will be almost religious with that, and that being their coping mechanism and their gateway and their pathway and all of the beautiful things that help them on their journey. That will be their focus. So some well-beings will focus on fitness, some will focus on diet, some will focus on psychology, some will focus on religion. But I would say that each of the well-beings that I've met who's a genuine well-being focuses on one thing and knows what works for them. I'd say the biggest secret is firstly that not everybody who's a well-being is always super happy, and they do have challenges, but mainly that those who are well-beings have a complete focus on one or two things, and they do them regardless of the situation.
I really like the point where you said all well-beings have one thing that they focus on, right?
And I think the point is, so example, like, for example, I'm very close with Andy Cape. Andy Cape's, or Dr. Andy Cape, I should say. He'll love that even more. Dr. Andy Cape's focus is completely on the science of positive psychology. based on his own experiences in life, that one light, so to say, of what's helped them, and they're using the light that's helped them to then light the path for others based on their experiences.
Very well said. I think with prominent names in the industry of happiness and well-being that you've mentioned, we've definitely got a more thorough approach and more thorough clarity on these pioneers. Moving on to the second question. I hope this is as interesting as the first one was for you. A certain amount of stress is good to achieve certain goals, but how do you differentiate the good stress from the bad stress? And talking about stress, how have you dealt with exam pressure, exam stress, in your childhood?
The difference between good stress and bad stress is the impact that it has on you. For example, if you are late for something, right? Let's use a classic example, and again, Indian audience, let's imagine that you're late for something, which is very common for a lot of people who are going to be watching this. If you're late, that situation is almost neutral. The situation of being late is neutral. Now, what being late means for the individual in that situation is different. For somebody who is often late and thinks that being late is a prompt to get ready and is a prompt to get into gear and take action and get ready, get changed, and set out of their front door and go to wherever they need to go, that is a good stress, because without that stress of being late, they would have sat there for a very long time. Another person who is used to being very punctual, say, the thought of being late will be much more stressful. The same situation, let's imagine the situation means that the person or the individuals are going to be so late that they'll be 30 minutes late. For some people, that's absolutely okay and socially acceptable. For other people, that's absolutely not. So I'd say that the difference between good stress and bad stress, or eustress and de-stress, is simply the impact that it has. Now, a lot of people will say certain stresses are good or bad, but I would take a step back and encourage everybody watching this video and listening to this to take a step back and think about what is the stress and that impact on you. If that stress has a good impact, then manage it well, because again, the line between good stress and bad stress is very, very thin, very, very thin. And what can be good stress over a prolonged period of time may end up being bad stress. So just be mindful and watch how the stress impacts you, to think about how somebody who is stressed about exams, I would question the reason of that stress. So it's meaning to yourself. So for those watching now who are approaching exam season, I know exam season is approaching in India, if you can find a way of putting that situation that you're in onto you and thinking, what will I gain from doing this? You might hate maths. You might hate maths, but if you need to pass maths to get into a university, or you need a minimum score in maths to be able to pass the module, which means that you get to have a gap year or apply for a certain internship, then you have to find a way to make it work. So what is the meaning that you're applying to the situation that will allow you then to perform going forward? So I would ask and encourage all students listening to this to think about the meaning that they're applying to their upcoming exams, and to find a meaning as personal as possible. Even if you share that with only 1 or 2 friends, fantastic, but use that as your source of motivation to go forward.
I really like how you said every child should have a personal meaning when it comes to exam and exam stress and dealing with exams. Understanding what you really want out of them is important, not being in the rut of let's all run towards the end of the race,
Also, caveat is that all of these things are much easier to say than to do. All of it. Everything within the happiness world, everything within positive psychology is much easier to say than do, which is why it's important that you have a couple of friends or a couple of mentors or a lovely supportive page that you follow on Instagram, something to keep you going in those challenging times. Because it's lovely for us to say on a sunny Sunday afternoon in Delhi to say these things once we've been through that exam situation. I know you're also, incredibly academic too, so I'd love to hear your advice maybe on this conversation or another one. But saying one thing and doing it is very difficult. So you need a good support system to help you through this phase. So share your goals with a couple of friends, or family members, whoever's closest to you and whoever you can trust, and then use that as accountability to go forward.
Do you think there is a concept like too much positivity, where the pressure of constantly being positive can take us into a downward spiral? Do you think there's something like that? And following up that same question, do you think there's one thing that the Gen Z can do to be well-being?
Clever, Tanya. What I was thinking, so when you were saying the first point about too much positivity, that's known as toxic positivity. And it was a term I was exposed to for the first time maybe 2-3 years ago. And toxic positivity is what I think you're referring to in terms of how people can be in a situation which may not be favorable. And toxic positivity is where somebody is sharing a situation or experience or perspective of something to give that person what they believe is hope to get through the situation, but it's actually making them feel worse. Another example is if you injure yourself. You know, a lot of teenagers, you know, make mistakes and injure themselves in funny and different kinds of ways. And you might fall off a scooter, you might fall off a bicycle, you might get a cricket ball in your face, whatever it might be. And people will say, well, at least you didn't break a bone, at least you didn't fracture that. You could have died. If you fell differently, you could have broken 3 more bones or something like that. And that's toxic positivity, because people in that situation are feeling pain. You know, it's feeling pain, and toxic positivity invalidates that pain and receives it. But toxic positivity in its most simple form is when somebody who is often well-intentioned does not know what to say. So in these situations, instead of saying, oh, well, at least they live to 85, they can be a lot more empathetic and say, how do you feel about it? How are you feeling about it? It's pretty crap what's happened. I'm sorry that you've been through that. How are you feeling? Instead of feeling obliged to give a response. When somebody has hurt their wrist instead of broken their wrist or sprained their wrist and not fractured it or something like that, you can say, oh, how does it feel? What are you able to do? What are you able not to do? How does it feel when you brush your teeth? Is it the same or are you using your left hand? Instead of saying, well, at least you didn't break your wrist, you should be grateful. And the final one, you know, about food, we can say, okay, what would you prefer? How could I make this differently next time going forward? You know, ask better questions, you get better responses. It's because a lot of people are very sensitive that when they say things, it's often from their interpretation than the other. So toxic positivity is very common. It's often done through a lack of awareness, very well intentioned. Often people who are toxic positive, people think that gratitude is, or somebody who's not responsive to their toxic positivity is ungrateful, which is completely false. So I would just say to be mindful of toxic positivity is that happiness is on a scale. So if you look at traditional psychology and positive psychology, this is the scale. Traditional psychology, positive psychology, neutral. If, say, I am on a -3, and let's just say you're on a +3, or let's just say I'm on this end of the spectrum, you're on that end of the spectrum, you are going to be much more receptive to my comments. If I am asking you to be grateful for a situation here, even if it's toxic positive, you're more likely to be grateful because you're living here and you're spending your time here. If you're here, that toxic positive comment could actually push you further down the path, down the wrong path. And that's where people have to be very careful and very sensitive about an individual situation, because if you say the wrong thing to them, thinking you're being positive, thinking you're being optimistic, thinking you're being kind, where actually you're just being the 4-letter word and you're being mean and you're putting your own opinions and beliefs on top of somebody else's, then that can make the situation worse. So toxic positivity has no place in society. It should be eliminated, and people should be educated on empathy and kindness and understanding somebody else's position so that they ask better questions and allow people to share how they actually feel and have a conversation from that, as opposed to just communicating what you wanted to say in that situation, which is often incredibly biased and irrelevant to the situation that another person. And your second part of the question was, sorry?
Our second part of the question was, how do you think, if there's one thing the Gen Z can do to be well-beings, our Gen Z audience, what can they do to be well-beings?
Yeah, I'm basing this on social media. I would suggest, and again, recommend and encourage that everybody, not just Gen Z, but Gen Z in particular, because the brain is still forming at that age, is to be a lot more mindful of the content that is consumed. So consume content that makes you feel good after you've consumed it. So if you're on social media and you're watching a video of somebody having a great holiday, or somebody going out on a date, or somebody eating a lovely meal, or somebody wearing a cool outfit, and you watch that video or you watch that reel and you feel afterwards, wow, that's awesome. That's really cool. I love that that person's living that life. I love how they're wearing that outfit. I think that outfit really suits them and I love that color. Or that is an awesome meal. I feel inspired to make that meal. Fantastic. Consume more of it. But if you're watching that content and you watch that same cooking video or that same travel blog or that same outfit or that same party, and you're thinking, oh gosh, I wish I was there. I wish I was there. I feel like my life sucks. I'm not able to cook like that. I'm not ever going to be able to cook like that. I can't even find food like that. I'm just useless, and I'll never be invited to parties like that, and I'll never be able to afford to travel somewhere like that. And it's really sad because I'm just stuck in my own place, and all these different kinds of loops that people can go on. I would say to be incredibly mindful about the content that you consume. Consume content that inspires you. Yes, it may trigger you. It may highlight what you believe you do not have, but hopefully it gives you a pathway or at least some direction to where you want to go. So be mindful of the content that you consume. Consume much more content that makes you feel good after you've seen it, and consume way less or almost zero content that makes you feel inferior afterwards, because the modern world, whether it's sponsored ads, whether it's any sort of anything on the internet, is designed to make you feel that you are not good enough for something. And be mindful going forward that there will be certain things that make you feel good. Again, shout out to Gary Vee, Andy Kay, Julian Pace, Claude Silver, you know, all of these, Raj Kotecha, all these fantastic people who inspire you. Team Youniverse, again, best page on Instagram. People who make their pages designed for you to help you feel better about yourself and more confident. Follow more of those pages, consume more of their content, be engaged by it, and then going forward, naturally, the way that our brains are wired, we will be more open-minded to certain situations. And again, one extra tip for these Gen Zs, which I learned in my mid-20s and I wish I learned in my early 20s or teens, is instead of saying, I don't have that business class ticket, I don't have that lounge experience, I don't have that posh suit, I don't have that car, I don't have my own house, XYZ, XYZ. And if these are things that you genuinely want, instead of saying, I don't have that, ask, what do I need to do to get that? What position do I need to be in to get that? Because there's a lot of people, whether it's about IPL auctions, whether it's about Bollywood movies, whether it's about travel blogs, a lot of people want that, but they will never understand or never put the effort in to understand what happens for somebody to get to that point. If somebody is on a travel blog to the Maldives, let's ask, how much does a holiday to the Maldives cost? What is it about the Maldives that they want to go for? Why do you want to go there? Just because somebody else has gone there? Why do you want to eat at that restaurant? Why do you want to go business class? Why do you want to do these things, first of all? And then secondly, if you still want to do them, ask yourself, how can I afford to be able to do that? What position do I need to be in to be able to do that?
Very well said. Very, very well said. Especially how you said consume more content that makes you feel good instead of content that makes you feel bad. Very, very good advice, Sanj. I think we're closing up now. Thank you, Sanj, for 3 things you need to know today and getting your advice, your opinions here on the platform. Thank you for coming on this platform. And here we are saying goodbye to our audience. See you in episode 3.